to a Hope 1032 podcast.
Welcome to this bonus episode of the Hope Book Club podcast. I'm Katrina Roe. Thanks for listening. Today, we're joined by Australian author Sulari Gentill. Her latest murder mystery is called The Woman in the Library. In this book, an Australian novelist is writing a murder mystery about four strangers who happen to be in the Boston Public Library at the very moment a woman is murdered. Her scream brings them together. But is there another connection between these four new friends? While we're being drawn into this murder mystery, we also know it's being written by a fictional Australian author, Hannah, who's corresponding with a mega fan in Boston called Leo. Leo feeds Hannah local information, but as the book goes on, Leo's suggestions become increasingly concerning. As he sends her ideas for murders and photos of crime scenes, Hannah worries about the lengths her biggest fan might go to for a good story. Welcome, Sulari. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Oh, absolute pleasure to be here, Katrina.
Yeah, so I follow you on social media a bit, and it's just lovely seeing how much you're enjoying the success of this new book. How does it feel to have a hit novel on your hands?
Oh, look, it's a little bit surreal because, as you know, I'm not new to this game. I've been, this isn't my first rodeo. In fact, I had 14 rodeos before this one. And so I'm an established writer in the Australian market. And all the time, this kind of success is what you hope for and what you dream about. But funnily enough, when it happens, it still takes you completely by surprise. And it's a little surreal. It feels almost unreal.
But it seems like you're at least kind of just enjoying the moment and not getting stressed out about it, at least.
Yes. Well, this is the thing about this industry that we're in. It's a tough one. And, success can be here one day and disappear the next. And as much as there are lows, there's these wonderful, wonderful highs. So you have to take the highs and enjoy them while they're there, because you'll need to remember them later on, I think, as you spend those lonely hours, usually in the middle of the night, tapping on a laptop trying to get a story out.
So, look, of course, as you mentioned, you've written many other books. You're already well known in Australia as the author behind the Roland Sinclair, historical murder mysteries. There are 10 of those, I believe. What started you off on the road to being a novelist?
It was accidental. I stumbled into it. So there was no epiphany. There was no particular design. I was a lawyer at the time. And I was a serial hobbyist. I was one of those people who pick up a hobby, do it really intensely for 6 months, master it, move on. And so, I've done ceramic doll making and lead lighting and welding, and I can pregnancy test your cows, you name it, I've done it. And I started writing in much the same way. I'd finished the welding course and I was looking for something to do, and I thought, I'll write a novel. And it was a novel. and I just sat down and I started writing. But very quickly, it was like breathing properly for the first time in my life. And I realized that it was what I should have always been doing. It just took me a long time to figure that out. I realized that I didn't want to do anything else. And so I wound back my legal practice, and I've been a full-time writer for several years now.
You're so fortunate that you discovered that before you really committed to the welding. You could have been 85 years old and still welding and going, what's missing in my life?
Well, perhaps one day when I'm old or older, I'll look back and think I could have done something with that welding if only I stuck at it.
I don't know. Look, your Roland Sinclair books are also murder mysteries. So was that something that you were always going to be writing in that genre? Like, have you always been interested in murder mysteries?
Oh, my first book weren't murder mysteries. My first books were a little sort of YA new adult mythic fiction series called the Hero Trilogy. They were published as well. I think they're out of print now. So I wrote them before I wrote Roland. It was just that Roland was the first one published. And I moved to murder mystery simply because, you know, my husband suggested it one day. He told me, that everybody loves a murder. And, initially I ignored him, as you do, but I came to realise that the challenge with writing is making writing work with your real life. And I had in the bed next to me a captive editor, and I wanted to keep him captive, and I wanted to make sure that he would continue to edit my books and be engaged with my work. And so I started actively looking for something that would interest him as much as it interested me. And so the Roland Sinclair mysteries are set in his particular era of history. He's an historian, and they're also murder mysteries because that's what he liked to read. And funnily enough, it was only after I started writing it that I realised how much I had also cut my teeth on murder mysteries. I had been a huge Agatha Christie fan. I had grown up with the Famous Five and the Hardy Boys, which are all crime fictions. And, even my television viewing was geared towards those BBC crime dramas. And so it felt very natural to slip into crime fiction.
And so The Woman in the Library is a little different to other crime books because the mystery we're reading is also being written within the pages of the book. And then the chapter that we've just read is critiqued by this friend of hers, this writing friend in Boston, Leo. Was that fun to write something that was just a little different from the normal, I guess, structure of the genre?
Oh, look, it was. Look, all writing's fun. For me, I wouldn't do it if I wasn't having a ball with every single book. This one was particularly intriguing, and the setup was particularly intriguing because it does have those two layers of, the book being written and the story within the book. And then there's a third layer of the story within the book. So
did that get complicated, like keeping track of all that?
No, funnily enough, It didn't. It made perfect sense to me because my life is the story I'm writing and the life I'm living. So it was a little bit analogous to that. I have written a lot of crime fiction now. There's, 10 Roland Sinclair books, and they tend to fall into the traditional crime fiction of the amateur detective, solving a murder. And so, and I love writing traditional crime fiction. The reason it's traditional is because it's a formula or it's a format that has been successful, that readers engage with and writers engage with, and it gives you a vehicle to have discussions about things like politics and social justice within the framework of a crime novel. But having written so many of them already and established as a crime writer, the challenge then becomes, and the interest then becomes, how can I expand the genre? How can I write a crime novel that is truly novel, that nobody else has written before, or nobody else has written anything like it before, despite the fact that the whole world seems to be writing crime? And so I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed this idea of let's get a really bizarre setup. Let's twist the plot and also twist the structure and give readers something that they have never experienced before.
Can you tell us about that moment, that spark of the idea that I know that your husband was also involved with when you came up with the idea for this novel?
Oh, yes. Well, I was actually writing a Roland Sinclair novel at the time that this novel sparked. The 10th Roland Sinclair novel is set in Boston. Now, I've never been to Boston, but I did want to write a book set in America, almost as a nod to American readers who were embracing Roland at the time. And so I chose Boston because I had a friend who happened to be in Boston at the time. And Larry Vincent is an American writer, and he was writing his book, The Theft of Privilege, in America, in Boston, using the Boston Public Library at the time. So I wrote to Larry, and he very generously agreed to be my legs and eyes and research in Boston. And so I would send him questions for him to answer so that I could write a novel set in Boston with some authenticity. But Larry is a much, much better researcher than I am. He goes to lengths that I would never dream of. So in addition to just answering my questions, he was also sending me menus and maps and photographs and weather reports. And then he started taking footage of things like sidewalks so I could see how the snow's piled up on the sidewalk in winter. And then one day, there was a murder about 2 blocks from where he was staying. And he thought, Sulari's a crime writer. It might be useful for her to know what crime scene tape and coroner's vans look like in America. So he took himself down to the crime scene after the body had been removed, and he filmed it. And I'm sitting in Australia. I received the email. I opened the movie file attached to it, and there's a crime scene. And very obviously a crime scene. My husband happened to be standing behind me, and he said, "Gee, I hope Larry's not killing people so he can send you research." And I'm almost certain that he wasn't. 99% that he wasn't killing people. But regardless, it did strike me as a really good idea for a novel. So then I knew that what I wanted to do was write a novel set within this framework of a correspondence between a writer and her researcher. And I knew that the novel would start Dear Hannah. But that's about it. That's all I knew, because I don't plot. I just write.
I love that. It's very reassuring as someone who works that way as well. But what works so well in this book, particularly for me as an Australian reader, is that as our American correspondent, Leo, critiques her Australian use of language and gives her tips about locations and where to eat and that sort of thing, it really bridges that US-Australian divide, because, you know, we Aussies get references to Tim Tams and how superior our coffee is and all that sort of thing, which we love. And the Americans, I'm sure, are gratified when the little language uses are corrected. Was that kind of a bit strategic there, thinking about a way to appeal to both Australian and US readers?
No, I actually wasn't thinking about that, because to tell you the truth, the Roland Sinclair novels have been released in America and nobody corrected anything. Colour still has a U in all the Roland Sinclair novels. They were very, very thoughtful and courteous with Australianisms. So I think I was always confident that whatever I wrote, the Americans could rise to reading it without it being too much of a problem. But it was a facet of the correspondence that I had with Larry. He was constantly saying to me, "Sulari, you can't say jumper. No one knows what a jumper means." And, you know, I was saying to him, I can't bring myself to say he rooted for her. I'm sorry. So it was all these little exchanges that I thought added realism to the correspondence. So I actually included a lot of that in those letters, because it was kind of the way that Larry would correct my manuscript. So, you know, whilst all of this was going on, I was sending Larry the manuscript to have a look at. So that actually mirrors my process. The process between Hannah and Leo mirrored exactly what Sulari and Larry were doing.
I think that's why it works so well. It is so authentic. It still is amazing, though, that you can set a book in Boston without actually going there. Like, do you have a hunger now to actually go there and walk those streets and see all those places that you've written about?
Look, I'll be there at the end of October. I'm going on tour, so I just got the message this morning to lock in the dates and start booking things. So I'll be there in Boston. Look, you know, it's one of those funny things. Back in the old days when I was writing the Roland Sinclair series, I was appearing at the Sydney Writers' Festival, and a lovely lady in the audience stood up when questions were called for, and she was saying, you know, when I read the Roland Sinclair mysteries, I can see his mansion, I can see the billiard table, I can see the rooms, I can see the front room. I know that because I've lived in Woollahra all my life. And what she wanted to know was whether I had a mansion in Woollahra, that I could get the details so correct. And I had to tell her I'd never set foot in Woollahra. And what you do when you write is you sketch a scene for readers, and they bring to that all the knowledge that they have. So if you are not didactic about the details of your scene, it allows the reader's imagination to actually connect, and they fill in all those images, and they think you've written it because that's what they're seeing as they're reading your book. But in fact, all you've done is hint that there's this grand house. And of course, if they know Woollahra, they pull up a grand house in Woollahra and they think, gosh, she's got that right. And I presume it'll be the same sort of thing in Boston. What you try to do is you try to zone in on occasional details that sort of act as a kind of a spark or a catalyst for the reader's memory. Now, if the reader isn't from Boston, what they do is they imagine whatever city they think Boston looks like. So in the mind of each reader, that's a different city. That's a unique perception of what they think the Boston in the novel is.
It is exciting, though, when you've read about a place in a book and you then discover that it is a real place and you can see it. It somehow makes the whole book seem real.
It does. It's a kind of contract that writers have with readers, that, they know that we are telling them a grand lie. That's what a story is. It's a grand lie. But what we say in return is everything that we can get correct, everything that we can make authentic, we will. But come with us on this grand lie.
Well, one of the other things that's quite interesting in the book, because Hannah's writing, and it's an insight into a world of a writer, is there's this discussion with her critique buddy about whether or not she should include the pandemic in her work. And so what did you weigh up when you were deciding whether or not to include COVID-19 in this book?
So I was writing this book in 2020, was when I was in the depths of writing it. So that was the discussion. And it was about how we include COVID in our books. Were readers sick of hearing about COVID? Did readers not want COVID in the books? Was every book from now on going to be set in 2019? So those were all the discussions that we were having. And, writers take those sort of decisions not purely on the basis of what they feel. It's also on the kind of experience that they want to give readers. It's no point being didactic and saying, I'm going to put in these graphic details of COVID-19 if that means that your book sells 3 copies and you don't reach readers because they can't bring themselves to look at it. But on the other hand, ignoring COVID would be a little bit like writing in 1944 and ignoring World War II. It doesn't work as a narrative, and it sort of breaks that authenticity if you don't include it at all. So I think the challenge for writers now is to write about COVID in a way that doesn't abduct the narrative and make the book about COVID. Which is also a big concern for writers. We may be talking about something else, but at the time, COVID was such a big deal that any reference to it just turned into a snowball of discussion about COVID.
Yeah. So it works so well having that as a conversation between them with, Leo saying you must include COVID and Hannah choosing not to. It's in there, but it's also not really in there. So
yeah. I was accused yesterday in an interview of cheating.
Well, it's a good trick. It's a very good trick. It works. So here in Australia at the moment, it seems like some of our best known authors are crime writers. I'm thinking of people like Jane Harper, Chris Hammer, Devlin McTiernan. Do you feel like we're in a golden age of Australian crime writing?
Yes. I think Australian crime writing has always been good. There always been really clever, authentic, well-written novels. The standard of crime writing in Australia has always been really high. It's just that at this moment, the world is discovering it. They had Scandi Noir for about 10 years, I think, where everything was Scandi Noir. Now people want to come out into the sunshine, I guess. And the next thing to step up is the Australian crime wave. Certainly when I first started writing, the pressure was try and write a book set in New York or London because nobody wants to read about books set in Sydney. And that's not the case anymore. Sydney and Melbourne and the myriad of country towns with secrets are all wonderful settings, for worldwide success.
As you know, living in the country yourself, we are very mysterious here in the country.
I was talking to someone about that the other day, and the funny thing is about country towns, everyone knows everything. There are no secrets. It's the hardest place in the world to keep a secret is in the country, in a country town. And yet...
There you go. Well, your book's also one of, I guess, a growing number of books that are playing with the conventions of crime writing, and everyone in my family has killed someone is another. And there seems to be a bit more of this about, I'm thinking of things like Knives Out and Only Murders in the Building as the movie and TV equivalents. How does all this farce sort of affects the genre and the conventional crime writing? You know, do you think that it will remain as popular as ever, or will people be turning backflips now to do new things with the genre?
Oh, look, I hope they do. I think, you don't want a genre to stagnate, and certainly the crime fiction genre has evolved significantly from the days of Agatha Christie, where it was basically a puzzle and nothing else. And then, this character depth has come in. It's a much more literary genre than it used to be in some ways, and it discusses social issues better than any other genre, I think, because crime allows you to distract your reader with a murder while you discuss issues that matter without, sounding like you're lecturing or giving them a polemic. I hope it does evolve. I think I think we've got enough talent out there to try and fiddle with it. I think this new popularity of metafiction or the postmodern novel is a recognition that our readers are rostered on. So they have read every crime novel. They understand the tropes. So when you have readers who understand the tropes of a crime novel, you can stand back and not pretend that you're kidding them or not pretending that they don't understand they're reading a book, and you can actually break down that fourth wall and talk to them directly about the mechanics of it. So the trick with what I was doing with The Woman in the Library is to show my hand, to show the reader all the gears of how a crime novel comes together and still have them carried away with the grand lie.
It is quite remarkable that you can, read that murder mystery in the book, knowing that it's being made up by Hannah, and still somehow be so invested in it. I think that's a really remarkable achievement.
Oh, well, thank you. But I think also that, deep down, whenever we read an Agatha Christie, whenever we read any book, we know that someone's made it up. So the reader's ability to actually take a story just for what it is and have the characters live within the story, let them be alive within their own story, is a wonderful thing. And it's something that can be played with and can be used to have new discussions about what it is we do. The other thing is that there is something in a writer's process that's always mysterious. So one of the things that I was trying to examine in the mystery, within the mystery, is the ultimate mystery of where these stories come from and how they evolve. We all have notions about whether we're plotters or pantsers, whether we write in our pajamas or, read literature or read crime or, read dictionaries. But really, I think for every crime writer, there is always a small part of what we do that baffles us, that we don't know, that is the ultimate mystery.
I think that for the reader of this book is just adds another layer of joy to see the writing process unfold, to read about other book lovers. A number of the characters are writers and readers in the book, and that just gives it another layer of enjoyment as you're reading the book. I know that this seems like it was written as a standalone, but it's doing so well. Surely your publishers will want a sequel.
They do want another book. I haven't thought about a sequel. I don't want to ruin it with a sequel because, at the end of the book, I hand over to the readers to kind of decide how they interpret that final scene and how they interpret what happens next. And there's been a vast spectrum of what people think is happening and is going to happen in that scene. I love that. I love that engagement with readers. I love that they are taking over the wheel. So I'm not sure that I want to mess with that by writing a sequel. But no, there's something to be said for trusting the reader.
I know it's very early days for the book, but I'm sure you ask this all the time. Do you think there will be a movie? I mean, it just seems like it would lend itself to a movie.
Look, I hope so. There are discussions and there are people talking to people. I try not to get too involved in that because that's a really long process and really no one cares what the author thinks in that transaction. They just want the novels. I think that this book and the standalone before it might be my books that do go to screen, but I have nothing to announce at this stage.
Who's your fantasy dream cast?
I see them, and so I'm not trying to see who could play them because I know who they are. And it's like a little bit like casting someone to play your family. So I always kind of think that the best case scenario for me would be new actors that nobody's ever seen or heard of before, so that they can just be my Kane and my Freddie.
Fair enough. So what's next, Sulari? What are you working on?
I have a book to finish. So there was a book that I wrote before the pandemic, but the pandemic actually changed the story. So it was one of those things where that story could not stand in light of what happened. So I've sort of gone back in to fix it. It isn't a huge fix, but you do have to go back and rewrite bits. And I don't normally rewrite. I'm normally a one draft writer. So that's a bit of a shock to the system for me to actually have to go back and change things.
Is that a murder mystery too?
Yes, that's a murder mystery too. And it is also meta, but in a different way. So Crossing the Lines, The Woman in the Library, and this new book will be my meta fiction trilogy in a way. They'll be separate books, but they all look at different aspects of breaking down that fourth wall. And then I think I will have said everything I can possibly want to say on the metafictional line. I still have another rollie. Well, I have several rollies to write, but I have rollie 11 to finish. And there's a stack of ideas that are waiting for my attention. I have a tendency when I get a great idea, I'll stop and I'll write 10,000 words. And then I'll put it on the shelf, because if you've got 10,000 words, then you've got to start, and then it's much easier to pick it up and keep going. So I've got a few 10,000 word slots that I can to pull out and finish the novel.
We'll look forward to reading them. Well, thank you so much for your time, Sulari, and I just wish you all the best with this book, and that you continue to enjoy the success that's landing in your lap at the moment.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. It's lovely to be reaching readers on such a grand scale, to be having conversations with so many people.
Yes, you're going to need someone to start answering your mail now.
Yeah, so.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been lovely to chat.
Thank you, Katrina.
That's Australian author Sulari Gentill. We've been talking about her new novel, The Woman in the Library. You can hear my review of the book in episode 40 of the Hope Book Club podcast. Thanks for joining us for this bonus episode of the Hope Book Club, because life's just better with a book.
Hope 1032. Thanks for listening.